And good afternoon and welcome. This is Steve Fryer along with my co-host Kathleen Jacoby, and you're in the Millennium Cafe. And we are really blessed today to have Dolores Cannon with us in the cafe. Welcome, Dolores.
Yes, thanks a lot for asking me to be here.
Yes, welcome.
And I should say that Dolores is a regressionist and a psychic researcher, and she specializes in the recovery and cataloging of lost knowledge. And you've become probably one of the world's most unlikely experts on the prophecies of Nostradamus, and you've written about, 10 or 11 books now?
It's 11 books now. The last one just came out before Christmas.
Well, you are quite a researcher, and why don't you tell us, we're going to talk about the book, your new book, which is The Custodians Beyond Abduction, in a little while, but just so people can get oriented, why don't you let us fill us in on what got you started in this business and how you conduct your work.
Oh, that's one thing I'm not going to tell you is how I conduct my work, because everyone in the world wants to know my secrets, if you want to put it that way.
Oh, no, don't give those away.
No, I don't want to give them away on the air, Okay, but I want to make it very clear, I am not a psychic and I'm not a channeler. A lot of my work is so strange that some people believe I'm channeling. And there's a lot of that out there right now, but that's not what I do at all. I'm a hypnotherapist. And I don't do the normal type of hypnotherapy for habits and things like that. I can do it, but to me it's kind of boring. I like time traveling and going through time tunnels and gathering historical information. To me, that's the most exciting use of hypnosis.
That is exciting, but how did you get onto that track?
But I'm what's called a past life therapist. This is taking the people into other lifetimes to find the answers to problems in this lifetime. But I've been doing that for 20 years. But my roots in hypnosis actually go back 30 years into the 1960s. In those days, there were no books around, nothing to tell you how to do any of this.
No roadmaps.
No, so we were really writing our own script and blazing our own trail. The only thing out in those days was Bridie Murphy. And nowadays, that wouldn't even
that's
get...
right.
It wouldn't even get published
That's
nowadays.
Right.
It'd be too simple and too mundane. But I had to put everything on the back burner until my kids were grown and off to school, college, and getting married before I could get back into therapy, because to me that was the most fascinating thing. So I started up again about 20 years ago. But by that time, I had developed my own technique. And it's very unique because I'm able to get the person into the deepest possible level of trance. It's called the somnambulistic level. Would
that be like a theta brain state or something like that?
It's very deep.
Delta?
The only thing past that is any deeper, you fall asleep. And when you get the person into that deep level, they don't remember anything when they wake up. And if you're traveling in time and taking them back in past lives, they become the other personality totally. This life is no longer there. But you can see how you can get information because you cut out the conscious mind clutter. And people are always thinking, this is silly, I heard it on TV, or I read it in a book. You cut out the conscious mind clutter, and then they become the other personality. And you can get amazing information just by asking different questions. That's why I consider myself the reporter that puts the information together. But the average person, when they're doing this, will be in the lighter states. And you can get a lot of information in the lighter states in past life therapy. But I think the real meat of the details are in the deepest level. And a lot of hypnotists will not work in the deep level because strange things happen there.
And it scares them away.
Yeah. And if people have read my books, they'll know what I mean. I've had some very weird things have happened in my work. So we are like writing a whole new chapter in hypnosis.
Now, you've written actually 3 books on the prophecies of Nostradamus.
Yes.
Tell us just briefly how that process worked. How did you get in touch with Nostradamus?
It was totally spontaneous. I don't think anyone could have gone looking for him. But this is the most complete translation ever of the prophecies of Nostradamus. All 1,000 have been interpreted. And people say that would have been enough for a whole career just to have written those 3 books and to lecture on them. But this was in 1986 when I stumbled on it. And I was working with a woman who just wanted to go into a past life to see if she'd had one. She didn't have any problems or anything. And I call her a normal woman, but she had 10 children, and she was working 2 jobs. So it's not the kind of person you would think could think up a hoax to fool the world. And I've been accused of that and everything else. But when she went under, she went to a lifetime where she was a student, a male student of Nostradamus in the 1500s in France. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe she can tell me something about this great man. But that's where everything got very strange, because suddenly she said, he wants to speak to you.
Oh, my.
And
the man.
that doesn't happen in past lives, regression, because no one else in the scene will be aware of you. And then she began a 3-way conversation where she was telling me what he was saying and then repeating to him what I was saying. And he said he has an assignment for you. He could see that his prophecies were not being correctly interpreted, and he wants you to find a book and read them to him, and he will tell you what they mean, anagram by anagram, symbol by symbol, because the time is coming when they're going to come true. And he said he wanted me to be his link to the future. And, of course, it sounds very weird. And when the woman woke up and I told her what she had said, she was so frightened she moved to Alaska.
Oh, my. But that must have hit something inside of you. You must have felt a certain excitement about this, that there was something.
To me, I'm so curious.
Oh, yes.
I think a lot of people, it was a good chance to back out, say, I don't want anything to do with this. This is too strange. But I am so curious. I wanted to find out, was this possible? And before she moved, she had time for one more session. I think it was to appease me more than anything else. And we were having it with packing boxes and suitcases and everything. Well, he came through again, and he said, I still want you to do this work. I said, I can't. The woman's moving away. He said, now that we have made this connection, you will never lose me. And I will come through anybody you work with.
Oh, isn't
And he gave me the
something?
instructions, how to locate him and tests to perform. And then the woman moved away. And it was 3 months before I was able to try the experiment with somebody else. And it worked.
Amazing.
And I could contact him again. He says, well, I've been waiting for you. Now can we get to work?
So did the voice sound the same? In other words, the speech pattern that was coming out, was it the same kind of thing coming through this other person?
Yes. And before the 3 volumes were finished, he came through 12 different people altogether. So they said if a hoax is involved, it had to be a pretty elaborate hoax.
What kind of, in the information that you received about Nostradamus and his predictions, what was it that validated the predictions or the writings as they came through?
Well, see, no one has ever really translated all 1,000. There have been a few, and most of them are translated after the fact.
Piecemeal.
They are so complicated and convoluted that they were written in a definite code. So this is why he was telling us the code. I would read it, and he would repeat what it was all about, and then he would tell us what part of history it belonged in. At the height of my work, we were translating 30 in an hour, as fast as I could read them.
Amazing.
It's impossible for the human mind to do that. Well, these books came out in 1989 first, and they have been reprinted 6 times since then. Every time they have been reprinted, we would insert information about events that have come true. And they came true on these dates, and there were dates, names, and places in there, even going back to dates and names of the Gulf War. We were given the predictions for the fall of the Berlin Wall before it occurred, and for the breakup of the communist countries. And these is all things that came true after the books were out. So I was really glad the books were in print before it began to happen, or as people would say, you could say anything after the fact.
Definitely.
The problem is now they are still coming true. This last year, we added 50 new pages of material, an addendum to the back of Volume 1 of all the things, especially advances in computers that he predicted. And when this information came through in the end of the 80s, I just got my first computer. And he's telling me all these wonderful advances, and I said, oh, maybe in 100 years. And instead, in 10 years, all the things he saw are coming true, and there's even more out there dealing with future advances. So to me, as a reporter, this is tremendous information. One thing that's important, my readers are extremely helpful to me, because on the Internet, they are tearing my books apart, and they're finding things that I didn't know was in there.
So you're getting contributions.
More validation is coming from my readers.
Well, we're with Dolores Cannon, and she is the author of 11 books. And the latest book is The Custodians, Beyond Abduction. And Dolores has been on, over about 1,000 radio shows and all the major networks. And so you should be quite well known to many of our listeners, but I think it's exciting you have this new book come out. Why don't you tell us why you decided to release this book at this time and how it got started?
Actually, working on it for 3 years. It took a lot of material, and it's the biggest book I've ever written. It's about 560 pages, And it was about 800 pages, so I had to begin pulling the information out. I always work on more than one book at a time, so I'm working on 3. So the information I pulled out of this is going to go in another book called The Convoluted Universe. So this one is the biggest. But besides being a past life therapist, I'm also a UFO investigator, and I've been doing that for 12 years. I was the only one in Arkansas at the time they could call in to do the investigations, because the psychologists didn't know what to do with abductions. There's not in the book. If it's not in the book, they don't know questions to ask or what to do once they get the person into the scene. So they asked me if I would come in and help on these cases. And there again, in the beginning, there was no books out to tell you what to do, and you have to blaze the own trail. So I had to invent my own technique of putting the person into the experience. And here again, I wanted to work in the deepest possible level. That's where the information is. And a lot of the other UFO investigators stay in the lighter levels, and they stay in the emotion and the fear. And you're not going to get the true information. I go past the emotion to the subconscious, and you get a different story totally.
And what would you say accounts for all the seemingly hundreds, if not thousands, of abductions every year?
Well, a lot of it is real, because I investigate these all over the world. But, of course, you always have some people who want to fantasize, get on the bandwagon for whatever reason. And there are a lot of lecturers out there, too, that I hear them. One way you can tell is if a lecturer, you hear him time and time again, will begin to embroider the story and add new material that wasn't there before, then I really know it's a fantasy. But there is a lot of real experiences. They don't like the word abductions, incidentally. They like the word experience or visitation. And there's a lot of that going on, but I don't think it to the amount that most people think it is.
Well, that would be different. A visitation would obviously be different than being taken out of your bedroom or whatever. And
well, they said they don't abduct. They said they bring you back, is what they say. Well, see, all of my work with them has been positive. I have not seen any negativity.
Interesting.
And I have been able to put everything into place to understand why the things are happening.
Why are they happening? Why are people being abducted?
It can be a long story, but I'm going to try to get it as short as I can. I've written 4 books on UFOs and aliens. And the first one was Keepers of the Garden. And that means we are the garden and they are the gardeners. It's the ancient astronaut theory of the seeding of the planet Earth. And in the new book, Custodians, I also go into it because I've gotten the same story through many of the people I work with, just different words. Incidentally, the Custodians is my 12 years of research into this and the cases and how I went from the simple to the complex. In the beginning, it was sightings and simple abductions. It's no longer that easy anymore. There's a lot more involved. Other dimensions, parallel universes, this type of thing. But in order to understand the abduction phenomena, you're going to have to understand why they are coming.
Okay.
And this is explained in Keepers of the Garden and in this new book.
Well, the capsule version then.
Yeah, because we have been seeded since the beginning and taken care of since the beginning. And it makes sense because, whenever we get to the point we're going to be traveling in space, we're going to do the same thing. If we go out there and find a planet that looks like it'll grow something, we're going to try it because of our human scientific curiosity, that we will try to see what will grow there. And in some future time, they will consider us their creators. And they said this has been going on forever, that when a planet gets to the point that it can support life, when it's cooled down enough, then it is decided what type of life will grow there. And the planet is given its life charter because there are definite councils over, there's a pecking order. There are councils over solar systems, councils over galaxies, and councils over universes. And there's definite laws and regulations. But they do go and decide what kind of life will grow in these different places. And they try to start it off in the cellular level. And they said, you have no idea how precious life is. It is so difficult to get it to grow. Many times they will get the cells to begin to clump together and make multi-celled organisms, and then they will break apart again, and life will perish on that planet. So it's a really momentous occasion when it begins to create multi-celled creatures and then begins to develop into higher organisms. But naturally, this takes such a long time that it not one person or one group watching over them. It goes on for eons of time.
What would account for the various races that we have on this planet then?
Oh, it's all in there, and this is in the new book. It's the different types of genes that have been brought in and manipulated, because the idea was they said they wanted to give this planet, such a beautiful planet, give it a creature with knowledge and free will and see what he does with it. Mm-hmm. But they had to wait until the evolution brought the mammals up to the point that they could get the one that could be used. And they thought that the ape was the best one because they had to have some creature that could use its hands to make tools, and then they could genetically engineer the brain to where it could begin to develop. It's a very long, slow process. And a lot of the different genetic material was brought from different places.
By different races, alien races?
That's what someone the other night at a lecture was saying. They didn't realize these are real physical beings. They thought they were some kind of a spiritual thing. They are physical beings that developed in another direction according to the gases and the carbons, whatever, in their planet. They developed in different directions, different appearances. Mm-hmm. But they said the humanoid type is a very common type because it is very functional. They said you would have been surprised what you could have looked like. Mm-hmm. But once they began to manipulate the ape and turn it into what eventually became the human being, then the different genes are brought in to make, increase the intelligence and to give them these different inventions and things in the time they were needed. And all the legends in the world always have the legends of the culture bringer. Someone always tells them what to do. They don't just suddenly decide to come out of a cave and start building houses or planting. They're always told what to do. And these were space beings. They came and lived with these people for a long time because the alien beings don't have to die until they want to die. They have enormous lifespans, and they lived among these tribes, giving them information, and then they came down to be worshipped as gods. But this, in all the legends, the culture bringer always comes from the sky or from across the sea.
The sky gods, yeah.
Yeah, in every culture. Mm-hmm. So this is when they lived among them and naturally lived so long they became legends of gods and goddesses. Nowadays, there are so many people, they can't come and live among us. Some do come and observe, but not in the way they were in those days. So if it's time for a new invention to come into our reality, on our world, it is more or less spread through the atmosphere as an idea. Mm-hmm. And many times you hear of several people all over the world working on the same invention at the same time. They don't care who invents it as long as it gets into our timeline. But they said they cannot interfere. The Star Trek directive of non-interference is very real. And I said, well, isn't it interfering if you give them this information? They said, no, we give it to them one time as a gift. And then what they do with it is up to them. And many times they misuse it. They turn it into weapons, or they just totally turn it around from what it was meant to be. And I said, well, can't you just come back and tell them you're not doing what you're supposed to do? And they said, that would be interference.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. What are the crop circles then in all of this?
Okay,
have they spoken of this? Because that certainly is some kind of clue.
Yes, it is. I've been in the crop circles 3 different years in a row, and I've studied them. And I naturally ask questions about them. I know the ones I were in were not made by man. They are tremendous. And I asked them about that, and they said that they are a language. Mm-hmm. And the aliens do not speak as we do. They think we're very strange because we put one word behind the other and make sentences very slow. They communicate mind to mind with symbols and concepts, entire blocks of information. The crop circles are symbols and blocks of information that speak to the subconscious mind.
You're in the Millennium Cafe, and our guest today is Dolores Cannon, author of The Custodians, Beyond Abduction. And I guess I'm kind of curious here, more than a little bit, about why these abductions are taking place. What are the alien beings doing when they're abducting all these people, from your experience in having regressed so many people?
Okay, so that's why I don't consider it negative, because once you get at the reasons and the person you're working with the therapy understands the reason, then they can put it into place and go on live a normal life. A lot of the therapy is not done that way. They keep them in this fear mode, and you can't...
There's so much fear around this thing.
I've even
why is that?
Well, it's something we don't understand. They said you don't even understand your own races and religions in your own world. Until you can come to terms with them, how are you going to understand what they are doing out there? because they said it's not 4 races, it's one race, the human race. And we have to get used to that idea. But you know, like I was saying, going back to the idea of the seeding of the planet, and they've been taking care of us since the beginning. They said, why do people keep saying we want to take over the world? They said, it's ours. It always has been. And they said, we couldn't do anything any worse to you than you do to yourself. So, you know, they are taking care of us the whole time. But the idea was to give this planet a creature with knowledge and free will, and it was not supposed to ever get sick and never die, because that is the way they are. But there were circumstances that began to happen that interfered with that part. So the idea is they're still taking care of us and still wanting to get us back to that perfect being that is their goal. They're very concerned with the effects of the environment on the human body and the increase in cancer in the human body. So a lot of the testing they are doing is to help come up with new drugs and new cures and medicines that will help us in the future. And they said these will be given to the scientists the proper time to increase the lifespan of the human race. And see, I don't see that as negative at all.
No, it isn't.
But we hear so much about crossbreeding and this kind of thing, and impregnating women.
But if they should understand why that's happening, then it won't bother them. One thing, if they would understand that they may be responsible for the continuation of the human race, they might feel more honored than disgrace. You know,
I see.
Because there are definite programs that are being carried out. And some of these, see, because they seeded us, they're also seeding other planets out in the galaxy. And they always need new genetic material. And some of this is manipulated and interbred with other types of genetic material. And some people might think, well, this could produce monsters. But they said what you might find distasteful might be the perfect type of being to live on another world. So that is one of the programs, is to help with the genetic material. Some races, they said, have their homes have been totally destroyed, and they live totally on board the spacecrafts. They have no place to go back to, but they still want to keep propagating their races, and that they're not able to do it anymore. But even if they can mix those genes with another outside gene, such as human genes, it will keep the race going. They said life will find a way. It is very impressive.
They're sort of like seeds floating around the cosmos.
And they use it in different ways. But the most important project that I have found, they are very afraid we're going to blow up the world and destroy our world.
Understandable.
And they can't interfere until we get to that point, because it would not only hurt our world, it would send reverberations through the cosmos and disturb other galaxies. Yep. So this is all very important, because they are like the guardians of the universe, and they're watching that. But on the off chance that we do something as stupid as blow up our world, they are preparing another world out there. And they said it's very much like Earth. They call it the New Eden. Very much like Earth, the same kind of gases, not the same topography, but we would be very familiar if we went there. So they are making exact clones. And this is where some of the impregnations and things like this happen. They are making these clones of exact humans to put on that planet. And they not only have to clone the entire human, they have to clone all of the microorganisms that are inside of the human body. Some of these are not good for the body, and some of them are. So it's a more complicated process.
And what about all the animals we have here,
Yes,
too?
they are doing the same thing. And these will be on that planet. On the off chance that we do destroy our world, the human race must not perish. And the material would be continued, would be saved, so to speak, from there.
That's already assured.
It would almost be a parallel universe if there's another planet. Now, it's not a parallel universe, but it's a parallel.
It's different.
Yes.
It would be a new Eden, another planet.
New Eden.
This way, the human race would not disappear.
And would it take off from where we are now?
Well,
or does it have to go back?
They said it would be up to the people who live there what kind of a civilization they would want to build, and they're already doing it. But you can see how important this is if the person realizes what they're really involved in. And the ideal situation was supposed to be that the human being never know these things were going on. They're not supposed to have any memory of it at all.
That's why the blank out or whatever?
Yeah, and they
Loss of
do.
memory.
It's mind. It's like a higher form of hypnosis to shield the psyche, the subconscious, so that the person won't be terrified or know what's really going on. The ideal situation would be that they never know anything.
But you were able to get to these memories because you do hypnotic regression. Now, I wanted to ask you, in all the regressions you've done, there's probably hundreds in this book, right? That you've
Well, they're
used
not
to get
hundreds.
to this book.
I picked out the ones I
But I
thought
mean, you
were
did
most
probably
significant.
hundreds.
Yeah.
How many of these would you say were actual physical abductions versus something in a dream state or in an etheric realm?
These are all physical. This is what I wanted to make
I mean, of the
clear.
ones that you
The ones I have in this
uncovered,
book, yes.
not just the ones in the book, but in the larger sphere of the ones that you did in your research.
This is what I wanted to explain the difference, because a lot of people, like I said, not supposed to remember. Many of them will remember snatches, and they think it's a dream, or they'll remember bits and pieces. The problem is, they said that the chemicals that are in our atmosphere, the chemicals in the body, if the person is on any kind of drugs or medication or alcohol, this affects the chemistry of the brain and makes them remember bits and pieces of an experience in a distorted fashion. They are being human. They will apply fear and emotion to it. So when I work with somebody, the first thing I do when I take them under is to see if they had an experience. Many times they haven't. If they have, we take them beyond the fear to find out what really occurred. And later they'll wake up and they'll say, well, that's not what I remembered at all. What really happened was a much more benign experience, but it was being distorted by the chemistry of the brain. And that's what the other investigators don't do. They don't take them deeper to find out the real answers.
Now, that causes me to be very curious. Is this perhaps, you're saying that when there is alcohol or drugs, it creates a distortion in the brain.
It alters the chemistry.
It alters the chemistry, which allows for a filtering of some of these images and places of being snatches, which even though they're distorted, give a particular... There is an ability to touch that. Could that be why people try to drink and to take drugs? Could there be a deep desire to go home? And that this is a way of opening that door, even though it's a distortion.
Well, I think some people use it as a form of escape anyway.
Right.
But the main thing is they know something has happened, but they are remembering it as a bad experience when actually it wasn't. But it has been distorted by the chemistry.
Well, I guess I'm wondering what your best guess is about how many of the abductions that you've uncovered, or in the general sphere of abductions, are actually real versus imagined, or in the etheric realm.
I can't figure up a percentage.
Is there a way to figure that out?
Oh, but I can tell when I get someone under, because often if it's a dream, it's a dream.
Okay.
And the subconscious will tell it's just a dream, and there is nothing there. But if it's a real experience, then we can go into it. But there are people who just want to have this experience for whatever reason, psychologically or whatever.
And they ask for it and they get it?
Well,
is it that direct sometimes?
Oftentimes there isn't anything there, but they want to get on the bandwagon.
They're
They want to
making
be
it
a
up.
part of this. I always tell them, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If it's not a real experience, even if they think they've had one, if it's not causing any problems, leave it alone.
Okay.
Because you can really open up a can of worms and you can't close that up again.
So as you move them into hypnosis, you have the ability to know what's real and what's not, what's flimsy.
Yeah. Because you work in the deepest levels.
You go to the deepest level.
When you go in the deepest levels, they cannot lie and they cannot fantasize, unless their personality is the type that they do this in their normal life. Pathological liar, or someone who's constantly fantasizing, wanting attention. If that's their normal state, then they can carry it over in hypnosis. But if you know what you're doing, you can tell the difference.
Well, we're having a really fascinating discussion with Dolores Cannon, and she's the author of 11 books. Most of the information gained through regression hypnosis therapy. And the latest book we're talking about is The Custodians, Beyond Abduction. I'm Steve Fryer. You're in the Millennium Cafe, and we'll have more for you when we come back. Stay with us. This has really been a fascinating discussion. I wish we had 3 more hours. But I guess one of the questions I've had for quite a while is the idea of the alien beings working in league with our government or governments. What have you found out about that, Dolores?
Okay, most of the information you're hearing out there, I will tell you, is disinformation. They're trying to make it appear that the aliens are, doing bad things, working with the government and like that.
Yes.
They have always worked with the governments of the world. after the civilizations became established. One of the reasons is there are materials here on Earth that they must have. They need these to operate the spacecraft and things like this. One in particular is a type of something that's in our soil, but it's nothing that is important to us. It takes nothing away from us, but it's something that is available here that they need. So they've always made deals with the governments of any countries all down through time so they could get these different materials that they needed. And in return, the governments always want technology, latest advances, and things like that. But they said what has happened is that the governments are the ones that are reneged on the deal and trying to take it over because they wanted genetic information and things like this.
Advantages.
Yeah, and they wanted to take it and use it for their own. They said the main ideal now with the technology was to show them transportation. And instead, they've turned it around to warplanes and weapons. Like the stealth bomber was one that they gave them. And it's not the way it was supposed to be. But with the aliens, once they make a deal, they stay with it. Okay. The governments don't. And I said, it's kind of silly
for the ethics.
Yeah, the government to think they can fool somebody who can read your mind.
Well, I've always felt that if there is going to be an advanced civilization that gets to that place where they can come and do the kinds of things that they're able to do, they have to be operating out of a higher ethic or they would have blown themselves up.
Oh, yeah. But to think that the government can try to fool someone who can read your mind, and they said they were exchanging information, but they said we're no longer doing it at the rate we were. We are not giving them as much as we could.
Kind of wound down a little bit.
Yeah, because they don't like what we have done with them. But there is secret bases, and some of them are government bases, and there's one particular that is an alien base, but they said the government doesn't know about it. When they work with the government, it's always on a government base. They're never allowed on the alien bases, so they will never know they're there.
Have you received any information on the cause of the cattle mutilations?
Well, they said a lot of it is not being done by the aliens. It's being done by other people on Earth, experimentations. And they're getting the bad rap. They're getting blamed for it.
But they look so laser precise.
But a lot of that is experiments that humans are doing also. They said it's not totally aliens. They've done some, but they said they don't need that many. And they said an organ from a cow, when combined with an organ of something else, could produce a totally different organism. So they do that type.
Mutations. Well, again, I want to just bring this back. You were commenting that they have gardened Earth. Well, we're always told, as above, so below. So it's like if we can, as humans, recognize that we take seeds, we plant them in the ground, we tend them, we garden them. And not all those seeds are going to come to fruition, but it's the amount of life force. Why aren't we also gardened? And as you made that comment, they are gardening us and
taking care of us.
They are the gardeners, and a gardener knows you do not go and abuse your garden because you want it to flourish.
You want it to. And we will do the same when we begin to go out into space. We will.
Well, I have a question. Where is God in all of this?
Okay,
Dolores?
I get that question a lot. I believe they are closer to God, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the ways they are different is they don't eat food like we do. They like to observe us because we're so different. We eat, and they like to observe our production because they said we're almost like two separate species, male and female, and that we get sick.
John Gray was right.
Yeah, and we get sick and we die. So those are the way we are different from them. But whenever you eat, you are living off of the life energy force of the plant or the animal. And this causes the body to age and to die, really. And our scientists now have discovered why we grow old and die.
It's because we eat?
We eat and we breathe.
You know, what's interesting?
Those scientists now are genetically manipulating the human body to eliminate those two things.
Well, we've interviewed two people who call themselves breatharians. One calls herself a prana-arian or whatever, but she lives off of prana or light.
Well, they said they're trying to eliminate those two things to stop the aging of the bodies. They're going to take all the fun out of everything.
Exactly.
But the aliens, some of them live off of light, and they take light baths, and the intensity of the light and the color of the light depends on how long it's been since they've had the nourishment. And so I said, well, where does the light come from? Where does the energy come from? They said it comes from the source. Another word for God. So they are dependent upon the source. And the source is the one that tells them what they're supposed to do And they are the children doing the jobs that are being told to do.
Well, that doesn't sound so bad.
No,
So-
so they are closer to him than we are, really.
It's almost like a sacred progression, like a huge geometrical pattern unfolding, and that at the very center of it is that one light,
The
that
creator.
unifying force, that creator.
Because it has to come from somewhere.
Yes.
But they said this idea of seeding has been going on since the beginning of time. The ones that seeded us were seeded way back in their own time period. A lot of people like to think of Earth as all there is.
Right.
Earth is a young planet in the history of the cosmos, and our souls have been around forever, and they're going to continue to be around forever. So in the progression of time, we have all been aliens. We have lived in other planets and other dimensions. So if you realize that they are us and we are them, the same soul progressing through different suits of clothes. That's all the body is.
Yeah, we just have to get out of that idea that the personality me, is the one who's gone. It's that the consciousness of me, of us, is all is
Yeah,
one.
You
from
are
one.
not a body, you have a body.
Yes.
And whenever you leave this one, if you decide you've had enough of Earth lessons, you will go on somewhere else. So if you can understand that way, we are all souls.
Yes.
And we are not alien. They said it's not better than or worse than, it's just different than. And we have the same problem on Earth, understanding
We
that.
sure
those
do.
that are different.
We sure do.
So to me, if you see that way, they are not putting them over here and alienating them as something different. We are all the same when it comes down to the soul level.
So all in all, it's your experience that these alien abductions are actually a good thing.
Yes, once you become to understand it. And they said if the person doesn't like what's going on, all they have to do is say, I don't want to be a part of the experiment anymore. And they do respect that free will.
And you get to opt out.
Yeah, but if you want to continue, there are wonderful things that can happen.
And where from here, Dolores? Where does the research go from here for you?
Oh, I have so much information. A lot of my information has gone into other dimensions, parallel universes, very complex metaphysical ideas. I've been spoon-fed over all these years, the 12 years especially with the aliens. The information I'm getting now, I could never have understood when I began 12 years ago. I would have thrown it out and said, oh, this doesn't make any sense. They give me what I can digest at the time, and it gets more and more complex as time goes on, to where now I've gotten into very complicated metaphysical concepts. And once you understand that, it's much more out there than we could ever imagine.
So we can look forward to lots more books from you.
Oh, yes. The Convoluted Universe is the next one.
Well, this has really been a pleasure having you in the Millennium Cafe today, Dolores. And for those of you in the audience that want to get in touch with Dolores, what is the webpage?
Okay, it's not on here. Okay, it's www.ozarkmountain. That is the name of my company, but it's abbreviated, OZARKMT.com.
Well, again, this has been a great pleasure, and we've
Very
been
delightful.
looking at your books for quite some time, and I really highly recommend this book, The Custodians Beyond Abduction, or the triple series, the trilogy on the Conversations with Nostradamus, which is another amazing series. And you've got other books on the life of Jesus, I believe.
Yeah, we have two on the life of missing years of Jesus, and the parts have been removed from the Bible. Another book on what happens when you die and where you go afterwards.
Well, it's been a real pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for asking me.